source or the cause of our own suffering. Is that a part of his legacy? Or how sometimes he talks to us in a way that plays to the sensibilities of people who are under the influence of white supremacy, both soft and hard. So there's a tendency for some people to be, I would say, vulnerable to a particular type of rhetoric. And, I think that oftentimes when you talk to black people in a condescending or paternalistic way, it's really not for that community. It's for another audience that he's kind of currying favor for to talk down to us. Is it cutting food stamps? Is his legacy cutting food stamps? Is his legacy proposing to cut Social Security? Is it expanding oil leases offshore and onshore at a record level, higher than any president before him? Is it how he, campaigned saying that, NAFTA needs to be renegotiated and that it was a bad deal for America? And then all of a sudden gets in and now he's not only doubled down on NAFTA, he completely ran away from doing anything with that. But now he's doubling down on pushing for the TPP. Is that supposed to be his shining legacy? I mean, is it a failure to end the mass surveillance? He spoke out against the Patriot Act and some of the more heinous provisions in the Patriot Act, but when he got in there, the non-defense disclosure, the NDA, he didn't fight that. He pushed it through. The CISA, he pushed that through as well. I mean, he didn't do anything to kind of curtail mass surveillance. I think the only thing he really did was when the revelations were made, he pushed to make sure that, when Congress passed, when Congress made the NSA spying program, when they passed the authorization to make that legal, that it was retroactive. That way he didn't have to necessarily punish any people that were doing the program while it was still illegal. He did double down on that. Is it him aggressively prosecuting whistleblowers? These are people who work for the government and expose, things that the government does that are both unlawful and unethical. Is that a part of his legacy? I mean, what is Obama's legacy? Where are the highlights? I really don't see many. Even the slight glimmers of anything useful, they're tarnished by just a lot of dirt. I'm not even a person that's going to defend the Affordable Care Act. As it stands right now, it really seems like that was some sort of patch that really accomplished nothing in the grand scheme, but it still leaves us needing for meaningful action. If it was a real solution, we wouldn't be needing to renegotiate and redo and still be fighting to this day to actually get a real solution in place. I think that was just maybe, I don't know what that was, maybe like a bait and switch and misdirection, but it just seems like the Affordable Care Act is change, but not necessarily progress. And I've made that point before. So, I'm going to say this, and I'll let the viewers decide, but is it me or does Obama's legacy look like shit? And I'm not saying what he's done necessarily makes him worse than other presidents. I'm just saying that if you're really looking objectively at what was done in his presidency, it really wasn't necessarily a good thing. At best, he stewarded American empire and he made no meaningful change whatsoever. And if that's a successful presidency, that's fine, but we voted for change. A lot of us wanted change. And so in that regard, it is an utter failure. And that's not even me talking about, how he deported millions of undocumented immigrants. I forgot to even mention that. See, then this is why I said this off the top of my head. This is just me talking off the top of my head about what Obama's legacy is. So I'm gonna kind of shift away from that because it really kind of gets me worked up. So I'm gonna cool down a little bit. I want to talk about Elizabeth Warren. Now, I know everybody's aware that these hearings that they have a lot of times where they have these companies and have the executives of these companies come in front of Congress and testify. A lot of that stuff is just political theater. Like, he's going to get his tongue lashing. They're going to make him look bad on TV. In time, something else will occur. And, the news cycle will change and everybody will forget about it, and no real substantive change is going to come about from that hearing. It was just something that was there, like, oh, look at this guy, bad guy. Okay, well, go home to your millions of dollars, and nothing ever really happens to you. And well, the Wells Fargo CEO is no different. He doesn't care if people don't like him. How many honest people does he run into on an everyday basis that really matter to him? Like, most of the people around him are there to serve him, to get something that he has. Like, when you're incredibly wealthy like that, people kind of become commodities. They're there to service your needs. So I really don't think that, the ire he may receive from the general public really means anything to him. So, I mean, in that regard, I really don't think he cares. He's just doing whatever he has to do to keep his check coming in, and that's just about it. But here's what I want to talk about, though. Everybody's saying, Elizabeth Warren is back, and she's doing what she's always done, and this is a progressive warrior and all that. You ever notice something? That true progressives, when they're out there doing their thing, they don't get media play. The media doesn't have anything good to say about them. So that should already tell you right now that when she's getting all this favorable media attention, it's really just an attempt to rebuild her brand. She took a lot of damage from supporting Hillary Clinton in the primary. So, we kind of have to be careful about allowing the media to kind of manipulate, what our feelings are about particular politicians, and just stick to just judging them based on what policies they support, what policies are we supporting, what's their voting record. Because she's been in there for a while now. And just like I spoke about Obama opposing mass surveillance, Elizabeth Warren wasn't there on mass surveillance. She was brought around to the fight for 15, but she wasn't there on that either. So, as far as I'm concerned, her issues seems to be centered around finance and banking, and that's immensely important. I'm not denying the importance of that issue, but what I'm saying is, those are the issues where she can be counted on to support us, and other things and other issues basically that are not in that realm, we may need to actually push her, just like we would have to do with any other neoliberal. And so because of that, it's hard for us to really hang that like a medal or a pin, that progressive pin, or the stripe on the lapel, whatever you want to say. It's hard for me to really put that on her. And the reason why I say that is because when we needed her in the primary, where was she? Did she come out and speak for progressivism? Did she show that Bernie Sanders wasn't a fringe candidate? He wasn't alone, that there were people out there supporting him? No. She said she's going to stay neutral. For what? If you really do care about these issues, when somebody is out there fighting for them, you don't let them fight out there alone because you're scared. And I don't know if it's just cowardice or if she was trying to do something else. Whatever it is, it wasn't a concerted effort. And odds are whatever she was trying to do on her own failed because she's doing it on her own when she could have been coordinating and working with other allies to get a bigger thing done. But I'm not even going to get into that. I don't believe she is playing three-dimensional chess or checkers. I believe that's just an excuse that, we give these people when they make what looks like a mistake, and we just have a general liking towards the person, so we don't want to believe that they made a mistake. But I think it was a mistake. I think it's a mistake for any progressive to stand next to Hillary Clinton and proclaim her as a progressive champion. I think that's a mistake. Nobody, if you're really progressive, nobody should be doing that, because it's not helpful to your cause, and it's not helpful to the causes of the people that support you. So that's what I'm going to say about people who want to be a progressive champion, but when it's time to fight, when it's time to be out there and stand on those issues, they're nowhere to be found. And I think that, first off, we need to have courage, and I'm going to speak about that in a minute. We need to have courage as the populace, but also we need to expect courage from the representatives who supposedly represent us. We should be expecting that they too should have courage and fight for us, and we will go to bat for them. Now, I was on during the debate, and I think after the debate, I got caught up in basically an unwinnable scenario where, there's a lot of loaded questions and you let, somebody frame your narrative. So it's hard for you to really get your point across when the narrative's been framed for you. So you're already fighting at a disadvantage. So I'm going to basically rehash some things. But before we get into that, I'm going to talk about democracy. At a very, very simple level, how does democracy work? The idea is that you have a group of people who share, needs and interests that group together and collectively come up with some kind of decision, right? That'll basically be done for the benefit of, most people involved. And I notice I said most, not all, because obviously there'll be a minority, there'll be dissenting opinions, yada, yada. But just to put this in perspective, why are Democrats generally good on social issues? Why do they pretend to care about racism or sexism? Excuse me, I didn't mean to burp like that. Racism or sexism. Why do they bother speaking in like I feel your pain language or like I care about the working class and I care about people just like you? Why do they bother speaking like that and having that rhetoric? The reason why they bother doing that is because they understand that that's the type of rhetoric that they need to win election. That is the type of voter, the voter that's vulnerable to that rhetoric, the voter that feels like that rhetoric represents what they want. That is the voter they want to vote for them. So when they're doing that, what they're doing is making a calculation. By saying X or by holding these positions, these many people will vote for me and I can win election. Literally, that's what they're doing all the time. That's how you see them shift on things. That's how you see them change their position. Say, well, you didn't really understand me, 8 years ago when I said that. When really all it was the inputs in their equation have changed. And so they change their outcome, right? That's generally like almost like a corrective factor in democracy, right? If you're unpopular and you hold unpopular positions, you cease to be able to have the requisite number of votes to hold office, and somebody replaces you whose views are more in line with the populace. It's just a democratic corrective. I call it a corrective factor. So what happens when that corrective factor is taken out of the picture? What happens when you start saying, I'm not going to vote for you based off of the values that I believe that you hold or the values that I want to see in my elected officials. I'm going to vote for you because I don't like the other person. What happens when we have something like that? What happens to the democracy? What happens to a democracy when it doesn't have that corrective factor? I honestly, I know the answer. I'm asking rhetorically, but really, I know the answer. The democracy decays. And it just so happens that if you look at our democracy right now, it appears to be in full decay. And it's been that way for some time. And each cycle, it just gets worse and worse and worse. I saw a post on Facebook one time where they went back and they went through all the presidents, and they talked about the two-party system. Their goal is to basically get you to be against the two-party system. And I'm amenable to that argument, right? But it said 56 years of change deferred. And it had like president after president. Oh no, we can't vote for what we want because we need to defeat this person. Or, oh no, we can't vote for what we want because we need to defeat this person. And each time that same scenario plays out over and over and over again. But that real change is always deferred. It's deferred time and time again. And it's just like, I preach about it on this show almost every time I do a show. You can't defer any longer. At this point, we need to start building something that's going to get the change today. We need to fight for the change today, not tomorrow. And if we lose, that's fine. Sometimes you will lose, but you can't not do anything because you're afraid to lose. There's old adages that go on, forever and ever. Like if you don't win, wow, I'm really messing up today. You can't win if you don't play. That's what I meant to say. You can't win if you don't play. So let's take this election, Trump versus Hillary Clinton. Do either of these candidates really represent, the positions that a majority of Americans would like to see? We have a majority of Americans that would like to see public college be made, at the very minimum, super affordable. At the very minimum. We have large majorities that want to see a jobs-based program of direct spending by the government. We want to see massive infrastructure spending to replace our failing infrastructure. And, you can go down the line, but there's also majorities that do want a single payer healthcare system put in place. And yet, these majoritarian arguments are made, and neither of these candidates are really representing that. We have one candidate who says, I feel your pain, but all that stuff is just a cake dream, and that's not how the world works. You should just accept what it is here today. And we have another candidate that says, I feel your pain, and then proceeds to prescribe, policies that wouldn't necessarily help the situation. So where are the majoritarian ideas? Where are the politicians that are going to listen to the public and actually implement the public's will into their policy platform? Well, largely those parties are marginalized and kept out of the debate so that they can't express those ideas in front of the larger audience. I believe that this first presidential debate had a huge audience, and there was a huge vested interest in making sure that the third parties, and I shouldn't even say third parties, really it's the marginalized parties, because third implies a third one, like one, but there's multiple candidates across the country. But the outside parties were not allowed to use the debate stage to put forth their ideas, primarily because they're going to put up majoritarian arguments that people are going to listen to and want. And if they don't necessarily win the debate in the establishment eyes or whatnot, people are going to see that, and they're going to realize that it is possible to have what they want, and they're going to start flocking towards that, and you're going to see the main parties start to lose support unless they change. They don't want to change. They're perfectly fine just what they are. But originally my point was, when you start doing that lesser to evilism, you start to lose the democratic corrective factor. And now you're in a situation where you're not necessarily voting for what you want. You're voting for what you don't want, or you're voting against something that you don't want. But in our particular situation, where we're faced with basically the rise of corporate power manifest as neoliberalism, or basically as some sort of neoconservatism that's generally the same thing, but with broader social implications. You're really kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, and that will always be where we are until we break the cycle. And part of that is going to be supporting those parties, or going out into the political wilderness and not knowing where you're going to be. Maybe being out there and be the fringe for 10 years or so. But the nature of our system and the way that they do their politics will eventually lend itself to more and more people feeling disenfranchised, and you need to reach those people and change those minds. But as far as I'm concerned, until we're ready to go to that point, we really can't make the change that we're trying to see. We're just stuck in the same cycle. We're just deferring change, basically. We're deferring action to the next generation, or deferring it to the next election, deferring it to the next election. Whenever somebody talks about the presidential election, they say, well, really the down ballot races matter. You get down to the down ballot, well, really this matters or that matters, or we need to work on, building for the next election. Everything is always deferred. Why not today? Why not now? Because you're really not going to start making progress until you start doing things that are going to lend itself towards that actual progress. You can't say that if you believe in climate change, you're going to vote for someone who does not share that position. They don't believe in climate change, or better yet, you want meaningful action on climate change, and everybody is not offering meaningful action, so you have to vote from amongst the choices that are given to you. Perhaps that's the problem. If no one's doing a meaningful action on issues that are important to you, you probably shouldn't vote for anybody up there. And, anything less than that is not utilizing the democratic process to its full effect. You're not, acting as part of the corrective that you're supposed to have in a democracy. Like, if we want to get rid of corporatism, if we want to get rid of crony capitalism, if you want to get rid of, the undue influence of corporations in politics, you can't do that by voting for the corporate candidate. The candidate that the corporations are most familiar with, the candidates that the corporations are most pleased with, because they've already invested. They have a list. They have a succession list. They know who needs to go where and who's going to be up next. They have that plan, 10, 15 years in advance before the media even turns their eye to the next election. They already have their seeds planted all across the United States. There's never going to be a situation where the neoliberal is not put up against something from the right, whatever that may be. Unless we call the neoliberals, you have to call them from the herd. And you can't do that by supporting them. Because with every election that they win, every election that they stay strong. You're not doing anything by protesting them. You're not doing anything by talking a whole bunch of crap about them. Because in all honesty, they don't care about that. They care about when you get in that voting booth, what are you going to do? You're going to pull the lever for D or R. And so long as you remain trapped in that mindset and trapped in that game, you're always going to lose. And so this is why I really want everybody just kind of think about what they would like to see. And if a candidate is not doing that, if a candidate is not making meaningful progress on that, if a candidate says they want to make meaningful progress on something and you don't visibly see them doing it, not just the media campaign or the propaganda, like you don't physically see any real policies being enacted that would actually lead towards a result that you would like to see, you should probably not be supporting that candidate. If you challenge them and they don't have anything to say for it, you probably need to think about perhaps supporting someone else. So the end thought of all that ranting is just to say that the corporate candidate is not going to be the person that's going to help you, increase your wages or provide health care or cut their own profits in order to provide access to things that we need for everyday life for everybody, not just the people who can afford it. They're not going to do those things. So if those are your goals, you need to be basically supporting people that are making it their mission as a part of their polished platform to do those things. And I think right now what we see is, so far, neither of the mainstream candidates are there. There's something I wanted to talk about outside of that. When I said going into the political wilderness, it brings back to something that Chris Hedges said, like Syriza in Greece, first is that in Spain. Fact check me on that. But basically they were a fringe party 10 years, and then 10 years later they became a major party, and now they control the government. That just goes to show you, and I know our institutions are different and the way things work are different, but that just goes to show you that if you support the fringe candidates, their type of politics will become mainstream over time. You just have to support them. And I think, when you have people who are so-called progressives, and now I'm going to come at the media, I'm going to come at them specifically. TYT, the Majority Report, who else? Tom Hartman, big time. And even like a lot of our intellectuals in academia, we have Eddie Glaude and Adolph Reed. They'll basically give you a long history lesson and all the different things that have happened and how they happened and what the history behind this is or what really happened behind that. And they have a deep analysis, and all of it's hugely prescient, right? And then at the very end, they'll say, but you need to maintain the duopoly. You need to continue to vote for, one of the two candidates, and you can fight it out later. And it's just like, well, all of what you told me lends itself to a completely different conclusion. I would even argue that Bernie Sanders did the same thing. He gets up there and he basically pounds the pavement on his positions and what he would like to see. And then when the power structure really leaned in on him, what did he do? He bends his head, he bows his head and bends the knee. It's just like, why did you do that? And he will say, well, I need to accomplish whatever I can. It's like, well, maybe you should have just stood on your principle. And if you lose today, that's okay. You can come back later on. But he couldn't do that. And based off of what I've seen, that's also why I wonder about these progressives like Elizabeth Warren. They're progressive when it really doesn't mean much. But when it comes down to fighting, when the power structure really comes after you, when the corporations are all aligned against you, all you have are your supporters. What are you going to do? Are you going to stand on your principle and fight for what you believe in? Or are you going to bow the head and defer the fight till later? Because when you do that, basically what you're saying is you're not ready to fight until the battle's won. Or until the fight is, in your favor and you can just win straight out. When the power structure or till the fight just really doesn't even matter anymore. Because you're fighting about something small when there's greater things to be fighting about. Now, since we're in this vein, I want to talk about supporting candidates, and I never talk about really trying to read into somebody's mind. I really don't try to read into that. I try to basically use, an objective look at what they're really talking about, what they're getting at. But Hillary Clinton made some comments, and right now we're in the middle of an intense media campaign, and what she did was she showed us what she really thought. And they're trying to spin it off as though she said something prescient and what she's saying is true, and it's just like maybe she didn't say it right. No. She said exactly what she felt, or exactly what she was trying to say to that audience. And the way she said it, and the context in which she said it, gives us a clue about probably what she feels. And she basically said, there's a strain on one hand, the kind of populist, nationalist, xenophobic, discriminatory kind of approach that we hear from a Republican candidate. And on the other side, there's a deep desire to believe that we can have free college, free healthcare, and that what we've done hasn't gone far enough. And that we just need to, go as far as, Scandinavia, whatever that means. And half of the people don't know what that means, but it's something that they deeply feel. Let's talk about that paragraph. Number one, she equates the fringe of the left with the fringe of the right. And, sometimes that is fair. We are both responding to the deeper economic anxiety that is basically dividing the country, from the ideological center. That's fair. But when she says things like free healthcare and free college, first off, those things aren't free. They're communally paid for by society, right? It's not free. It's communally paid for and provided by. So everybody pays into the system and then everybody uses it. So this idea that it's free and that you're just getting something for nothing, that's an idea that only privileged people that have no respect for the public commons, basically public good, would say. So she's framed that in a very, very peculiar way. And I want to focus on that. Then she says, like Scandinavia, whatever that means. We know what it means, and that's why we're asking for it. The question is, you don't understand what it means, or you do understand what it means, and you're just not going to give it to us no matter what. But I thought that was strange that she would try to frame it like, we don't know what we're talking about. We're wanting something that we don't even understand. It's a very condescending attitude. And I think the closest thing I can say to that is sometimes when I talk about, how somebody perceives something and I don't feel like it's valid, I'll use words like they feel it's this way. I'll use the word as they feel. And when you say they feel, meaning it's their interpretation is not necessarily correct. And that's what she's doing here. It's something that they deeply feel. So it's not necessarily correct, but it's something that they feel. It's their interpretation. So, basically what she's saying is she doesn't even agree at the core what people are asking for. So if you're for single payer healthcare and for tuition free colleges, provided by the government through everybody's tax dollars, you probably shouldn't be voting for Hillary Clinton based off of this statement here. And then she'll say, like, some are new to politics completely. They're children of the Great Recession. A Great Recession partly caused by some of Clinton's policies, of course, left that out. And they're living in their parents' basement. Now, the living in your parents' basement, I don't know if anybody's had a joke where they'll say, like, you know, somebody's still living with their parents at such and such age or something like that. It's really meant to degrade. It's meant to say, like, you can't make it on your own. Like, you're, you know, basically a loser in our economy, a loser in a part of our society. So I think that when she said that, she's basically calling everybody who's grumbling and all that losers in our economy, and that she's trying to kind of like marginalize us, you know, separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. And that's wrong. You know, they're living in their parents' basement as some kind of snide remark, almost like a scoff. You know, and here's another one. They feel they got their education and jobs that are available to them are not all what they envision for themselves. You know what? That's actually a fair statement. Because everything about economics revolves around expectations. We expect to live a decent life. We expect to, you know, get a college education, and basically the job we find based on that education should be able to afford us a decent life. But somehow expecting that is wrong. You know, that was an unrealistic expectation. Excuse me? I didn't know living a decent life and it was an unrealistic expectation in the wealthiest country in the world. Did not know that. You know what? I'm informed today. And then she says something else. If you're feeling like you're consigned to, you know, being a barista or, you know, some job that doesn't pay a lot, keep in mind Hillary Clinton hasn't had a job that doesn't pay a lot and doesn't have a ladder of opportunity attached to it, then the idea that maybe, just maybe, you could be part of a revolution is pretty appealing. And that's correct. You know, when you have nothing to lose, you know, you want to change the system such that, you know, your outcomes will be better. And then the people that have everything and that are perfectly fine, they don't want to change anything. They want to keep it exactly where it is because that's where they're comfortable. That's where basically their bread is buttered, so to speak. So she's speaking and she's basically telling us, you know, what her privileged view is. You know, now you can always argue it's a script and we can say we'll truly never know the real Hillary Clinton, but I'm willing to bet based off of, you know, what her class is. She is a multimillionaire, her and her husband. You know, she's never really been poor. You know, that this is closer to what she really is. This is who she really is. You know, we are just people that are grumbling and not supporting her, millennials that don't like her. They're just grumblers and have unrealistic expectations of what our economy should produce from them. And, you know, that's really telling about her as a candidate. And I really can't say much more than that. Like, we just basically got a glimpse of who she really is, and we should definitely understand that and not vote for that, basically. I'm not telling you who to vote for. I just kind of did. Didn't mean to. But, yeah. Ouch. Now, I did see somebody made a comment there that Eddie Glaude basically supports the blank out strategy. Let me explain to you what the blank out strategy amounts to, or at least my interpretation on it is. You can show your dissatisfaction for Democrats only when it doesn't matter to them and you know, has no chance of costing them an election. What that amounts to is you can challenge the status quo only when it doesn't matter. You can break the system. Well, I'm sorry, you can only do stuff outside the norm if it doesn't really affect the system. So basically, when it matters, you're always supposed to bow down. But when it doesn't matter, you know, show your dissatisfaction. And you know what? They probably like that strategy because it doesn't threaten anything to them. They say, oh, okay, well, you know, hey, you know, we're still good for this election, and, you know, next time we'll do some other propaganda, and you guys will be stuck voting for us again. Thanks. That's literally what they're thinking. And that's why I never really agreed to a blank out strategy. Now, you can argue that, you know, an electoral loss will lead to pain, but this is pain for bad policy that is already in the works that cannot be averted without breaking the system. But somehow we're supposed to fall in line and not try to break the system, because when we try to break the system, we could lose. But you're going to lose anyway, because you're inside a system that's losing. And there's no trajectory outside of moving outside of it. At the very minimum, we should be supporting the fringe parties as an attempt to exercise more control over the mainstream parties. But even that is, not, I don't know, it's something that you can only do if it doesn't threaten anything. I think at this point, like I said, you can't win if you don't play. This idea that you can only do stuff when it doesn't threaten anything is just not helpful. Even the least worst argument altogether is not helpful. At this point, we should be talking about what can we do to actually change stuff. And, I can go on and on and on, but I remember Angela Davis, just recently made a comment, and I thought that was, almost indicative of what we're talking about here. You'll have these erudites get up there, and they'll give us a history lesson, and everything will be on point. And at the very end, they'll fall in and support the status quo. And they'll say, well, voting for the status quo is not really supporting it. Actually, it is. Because the status quo only needs your vote to continue. It does not need anything from you but your consent in the form of a vote to continue the way it is. Now, if you're talking about basically everybody getting out in the streets and protesting and basically shutting the country down like they do in Europe, that's a different story. That's not what we have here in America. The institutions that make that possible are just not here because we let them be destroyed. So ultimately, the duopoly has to come to an end, and I think we really need to challenge that and be basically brave. Be determined to break it by any means necessary and to get what you want by any means necessary, because when you're not doing that, you're no longer leveraging the democratic corrective in your favor. You're letting somebody else leverage the duopoly against you, or the illusion of choice against you. So, Angela Davis, Eddie Glaude, Adolph Reed, even Juan Gonzalez from Democracy Now!, Paul Jay from the Real News Network, all of MSNBC. I've already said TYT, Sam Cedar, and Tom Hartman, and then like the more neoliberal like people. What's that guy's name on Ring of Fire? Is neoliberal Barron Cousins. Sometimes he kind of rides the line, but he's always down with the establishment. In the end, complains about it, but in the end, ultimately they fall in line. And I think at this point, they're really not doing us any service. So I'm going to take a look at some of the comments here. I have two more things I want to say, but I just want to kind of see what some of the comments are saying. So I'm going to just take a look at that really, really quickly. Okay, so basically I kind of want to end with two things. So I want to first say our democracy is the way it is because we allow it. The elite basically run the show because we allow them to. If you want to change that, the power is always with the people. Every time. That's not going to change. But so many of us consent to the way the system is, and then they marginalize the people that are not consenting to the way the system is, and we kind of get stuck. And then when we finally, a majority of us agree that the system is bad and we need to change it, then they misdirect people who want to change it into thinking that supporting it is changing it. Voting for it is somehow going to lead to some sort of systemic change. Or maybe the systemic change doesn't come from the vote. And there is some allegorical evidence to say that, yes, systemic change does not come solely from the vote. But what I will say is the democratic corrective does rely on the vote. And it does rely on politicians' perception of whether or not they can win an election or not based off of how many votes they feel they can get. So the vote is critical. It's just as critical as activism. You have to bring power to bear on these people, and when they ignore you, you have to take them out. And I don't mean physically take them out. I don't mean take a gun. I mean literally, you have to come for them in the primary, get rid of them, And if they win the primary, if they steal it from you, don't support them and let them lose to the political opposition. And then come back next time, or even support a third party candidate and get behind that person and challenge again in that same election. But that will be the strategy towards getting your policy positions implemented in policy. It won't be supporting them and then criticizing them and talking crap about them because they don't care. We've seen that this last 5 or so years that people have been protesting a lot of stuff. You have Black Lives Matter protesting. You have the Occupy movement brutally destroyed by the police, and across city to city, and by the FBI. Federal coordinating authorities were also involved in breaking up the Occupy movement. So, they've already shown that they're going to basically ignore these issues. So now, we have to kind of leverage both the vote and the activism together in sync towards some sort of goal. And I'm going to now basically close out with a quote. And this is from Eugene Debs. Actually, 2 quotes. He says, "When great changes occur in history, when great principles involve, as a rule of thumb, the majority are wrong." So basically, when things are first getting started, the status quo is going to usually be the opinion of the majority. But they're usually wrong. And then I'll say one more quote, and then I'm going to go ahead and close it out. "I fear that the threat of insanity, the loss of the ability to reason, you will hardly believe this, but intelligent Americans today cannot see the direct connection between war, murder, lying, stealing, and juvenile crime. Their leaders will propose to gain peace by war, to stop poverty by making the rich richer, and to prevent force and violence by preparing greater force and violence on a much larger scale to which the world never dreamed anywhere at any time." That is a super, super prescient statement. Left, up is down, right is left. Support in the form of a vote is not really support. These are all things that are wielded against us on a daily basis. And I just want everybody to be aware of what they are and start leveraging both the vote and activism together to achieve a goal. Good night, everybody.